Picture this with me, the quiet of a Washington forest. You know, that smell of pine needles, the sound of a chainsaw humming away. You've worked in the woods your whole life, you think you've seen it all. But today is different. There, through the trees, a flash of metal. Something that seems out of place in all that green. And that's how an ordinary day turned extraordinary for a lumberjack named Roger Thompson. It's a story we're diving into today.
And it's a story that's got it all. I mean, we're talking a crashed plane, a mysterious bag, and a connection to World War II that spans continents and decades. We're going to explore it all, the history, the emotions, everything. We'll look at how plausible it all is, the historical context, you name it, and of course, the enduring power of love and sacrifice.
So much to uncover. Okay, so we've got Roger, drawn in by this glint of metal in the woods. As he gets closer, he realizes it's not just some junk someone tossed aside, it's a whole airplane. And not just any plane, we're talking vintage, almost swallowed up by the forest. Clearly, it's been there for a long, long time.
It's described as being in rough shape, covered in moss and rust, almost like it's always been a part of the woods. But here's the thing. Roger doesn't call the authorities right away. It's a crashed plane, right? You'd think that's the first thing you'd do. But there's something about what he finds inside that makes him stop. A leather satchel. And inside, documents written in Japanese and a picture of a young couple.
Like finding a time capsule. Honestly, I think my curiosity would have gotten the better of me too. What would you even be thinking at that point? It's obvious this is more than just a plane that went down.
And that's where Roger's instincts kick in. Instead of going to the authorities, he goes on a personal mission to find some answers. He needs to know the story behind this plane before he potentially turns it over to, the official channels. He decides to find someone who can translate those Japanese documents. Maybe someone who can tell him who those people in the photograph are.
He felt responsible somehow, wanting to know more. And so he goes to this Japanese restaurant he knows in Bellingham, run by a family. What are the chances? Finding a crashed plane and then knowing just the right people who might be able to translate what you find there.
Like it was meant to be, don't you think?
Yeah.
This little decision to go to that restaurant, well, let me tell you, it ends up changing everything for everyone involved.
Okay, so we've got Roger walking into this restaurant, satchel in hand, hoping for some answers. He meets the owners, Mrs. Nakamura, and her daughter, Akiko. Can you imagine what must have been going through his mind? The curiosity, maybe a bit of nervousness too.
Oh, absolutely. He's carrying this heavy secret, this piece of the past,
Yeah.
And then, well, it gets even more interesting when he shows them the photograph.
Because their reaction, it's instant. Mrs. Nakamura's hands, they start shaking, and you can see tears in her eyes. Akiko's overcome with emotion too, and they start talking quickly in Japanese, clearly really affected by the picture.
And remember, Roger doesn't speak Japanese. So he's watching all of this happen, but doesn't understand a word. What a moment, right? Really shows you the power of a photograph. To reach across time, language, everything. To evoke such raw emotion after all these years.
Like he's opened a door to a hidden past, just by chance. And then, they explain, the photograph, it's of Akiko's parents. And her father, she tells him, was a pilot for Japan during World War II.
And this is where understanding the history is so important. World War II, for Japan, it was a time of immense suffering.
Yeah.
For a Japanese pilot, the war would mean incredible pressure, a sense of duty, and probably, as the war went on, a feeling of disillusionment.
I can't imagine what it must have been like to live through that.
Exactly. And that's where Akiko's father's story takes this unexpected turn. He had grown disillusioned with the war. He longed for a different life, a peaceful life with the woman he loved, who, we learn, was already living in America.
So he's caught. On one hand, his duty to his country. On the other, this deep desire for a life without war, a life with his love. What a dilemma.
It really is. And knowing that, it makes sense that he would come up with this daring, maybe even reckless plan. He steals a plane. His plan to fly to America to be with Akiko's mother.
Wow, that's incredible. To risk everything, his life, his freedom for a chance at love, at a fresh start. What would make someone do that? It's just, wow.
The power of hope, right? The belief that even with all the chaos of war, a different future was possible.
And what's amazing is that he actually managed to get one last message out, a message full of love, a promise for the future, but then nothing. Akiko and her mother, they never heard from him again. They were left with questions, unanswered for decades.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Carrying that weight of not knowing for so many years? And then out of nowhere, Roger walks in, and he doesn't just bring information. He brings them a piece of their family, a real connection to a past they thought was gone forever.
It's unbelievable. But wait, there's more to the story. Don't forget about that satchel. There was something else in there, something that makes this whole thing even more powerful.
The documents. The ones written in Japanese that Roger couldn't read. Well, it turns out they were more than just documents. They were love letters, written by Akiko's father to her mother.
And not just any love letters. These were written during a world war. Talk about the power of love, even in the most difficult times. I get chills thinking about those words, those feelings, hidden away in that wreckage for all that time, just waiting to be found. It really makes you think, those letters filled with so much heart, just tucked away in that plane all those years. They give us this glimpse into his thoughts, this man torn between what he felt he had to do and this love he had. A man who put everything on the line for a chance at a new life.
And they show us so much about his relationship with Akiko's mother, too. It's like, even in the middle of a world war, love and hope didn't just survive, it flourished.
You ever wonder what else is out there? What other stories we might find if we could just uncover them? It's like Roger stumbled onto this tiny piece of something so much bigger.
Makes you think about all those untold stories, right? Just waiting for someone to find them. But let's get back to that restaurant. So Roger, now that he's brought this whole thing to light, he goes with Akiko and Mrs. Nakamura to the crash site, to that spot in the Washington woods where her father's journey ended.
Can you imagine? To actually be there in that place, seeing where it all happened, must have been so emotional.
They talk about how they were weeping quietly, speaking softly to each other in Japanese. A mix of sadness, of course, but also a sense of closure, I think. A kind of peace. They weren't just looking at a crashed plane. They were seeing this piece of their history, a story that had been with them for decades, and now it had come full circle.
And I think it's really something that Roger went with them. He could have just walked away after that day at the restaurant, but he stayed. He became a part of their story, offered them comfort at a time when they needed it most.
It says a lot about him, don't you think? His empathy, his willingness to help. And because of that, because of Roger, this family, struggling with their past, they found a little bit of peace. It reminds us that sometimes the most amazing discoveries aren't in some museum or history book. They're out there in the world, waiting to be found. Sometimes it just takes a chance encounter and a little bit of kindness.
This whole story, it's like this powerful reminder. History, it's not just dates and names in a book. It's about real people, people who lived and loved and fought for something better. And sometimes their stories, they find a way to come back to us. And when they do, they remind us that even in the darkest times, there's still hope. That the human spirit, it's stronger than we think. And that what we do, even the small things, can have a huge impact on other people's lives.
Aku akan